Believe it or not, but this rusting shipwreck off the banks of the Mississippi River was once a cherished museum exhibition, celebrated for its historic contributions made during critical missions with the U.S. Navy. Yet, as you can see, these days, its honor is not exactly shimmering. How could something like this even happen? And what other stories does this rotting ship hide? Stay tuned to find out, as today we cover the story of the USS Inaugural. I'm your host, Ryan Sokesh, and you're watching It's History. And now, a word from our sponsor. If you're passionate about naval battles and strategy, I have the perfect game for you, World of Warships Legends. A massive, multiplayer, free-to-play console game where you can actually command historically accurate ships. What makes World of Warship Legends so special is that you don't just need quick reflexes, you also need a strategic mind. You see, unlike typical first-person shooter games, you have time to think and plan your moves here. It's like chess on the sea, where every decision counts and can change the course of the battle. Additionally, you can enjoy the gameplay experience with maps designed for quick engagements. The game focuses on player versus player battles ranging from 9 versus 9 combat to unique 4-team formations of 3 players each. And the best part is that you can do it all from the comfort of your home. You can command ships from 11 nations, and the fleet expands every 5 weeks with new missions and ships. There are 4 types of ships: fast destroyers, balanced cruisers, resilient battleships, and versatile aircraft carriers. The controls are easy to learn and plenty of opportunities exist to improve. With over 8 million players, the game offers more than 400 ships, 20 maps, and 100 commanders, along with regular collaborations that bring unique content. And there's more. This summer, World of Warships is teaming up with Star Trek Universe from July the 8th to August the 4th. You can dive into the game and discover iconic commanders, famous ships, and unique customizations from the Star Trek world. Imagine this: some Star Trek commanders have been sent back in time to use ancient technology, complete a special mission, and get Commander Jean-Luc Picard for free. Yes, you heard that right. For free. And if you're new to the game, World of Warships Legends has amazing rewards for you. They offer a welcome pack that includes everything you need for a strong start: the American battleship Arkansas, the German cruiser Karlsruhe, 7 days of premium account, 5 common creates, 10 red, white, and blue camouflages, and 10 hunter camouflages. So don't wait any longer. Click the link in the description and join the World of Warships Legends community. When we think of America's naval construction, from the 1940s until the surrender of Nazi Germany, we often overlook certain classes of ships that were pivotal to that war effort. Such is the case with the USS Inaugural, an Admiral-class minesweeper which fought in the Pacific during the war's waning days. You see, the Admirables were the largest class of minesweepers ever built by the U.S. They were armed with a single 3-inch deck gun for combating surface submarines or small vessels, 4 Bofors, and 6 anti-air guns. But it doesn't end there. There were also 4 depth charge launchers, 2 rolling racks, 1 Hedgehog mortar, and 2 minesweeping paravanes. At full load, with its 104 officers and seamen, they could steam at 15 knots, making them just fast enough to keep up with most merchant marine convoys. 147 of these ships were planned to be acquired by the Navy, with 123 delivered before the war ended. Now, the weapons were fairly diverse for a minesweeper. Depth charges don't need to be explained to most viewers, but as a brief refresher, they were large explosive barrels with pressure gauges set into them that would detonate at a certain distance below the water, either scoring a direct hit on enemy submarines or damaging them through the shockwaves. Whereas the Hedgehog mortar, well, that's a different story. You see, anti-submarine mortars existed in prototypes as early as the First World War, but the size and attack methods of the Mk-10 and Mk-11 Hedgehog mortars was far more efficient. Hedgehogs would fire contact depth charges from 24 spigots that, when fired, were arranged in a perfect circle. The 65-pound projectiles had 35 pounds of Torpex explosive filler, more than enough to damage most submarines if it made direct contact. And in a way to ensure effectiveness, all 24 explosive devices were fired in just a second. With that in mind, Navy records from both the British and American fleets said the Mk-10 stood a decent chance of damaging a submarine with each attack. whereas the Mk-11 had the same chance of sinking the enemy as the flip of a coin. Now, the Paravane was much more obscure, coming from a different, even earlier age of mine clearing and anti-submarine warfare. Paravanes were around the same size and shape of a torpedo, but with no warhead or mortar. The device would be lowered from the bow or stern of the ship, usually on destroyers or escort craft, as a pair of short fins kept it semi-stable at the desired depth. If everything worked and the ropes held, the paravane would snag or cut the anchor ropes of mines, causing them to surface, where they could be destroyed by gunfire or other more surgical means. It was also believed, but rarely executed, that paravanes could be used to entangle the propeller shafts of enemy submarine, as well as their rudders or conning towers. With that in mind, the Inaugural herself was built by the Winslow Marine Railway and Shipbuilding Company out of Washington. She launched on October 1st, 1944, and joined the fleet on December 30th. Inaugural departed California in March to complete her training in Hawaii, before finally joining security missions in the North Pacific during the Battle of Okinawa. Inaugural spent the battle resisting Japanese aircraft, deterring submarines, and sweeping for mines and small attack boats, all while having to also ride out a typhoon during the middle of July. Most of us know that this battle would be one of the bloodiest campaigns in American history, devastating the island while pushing the bodies and minds of the Marines and soldiers to their very limit. While undeterred by the Japanese offensive, the Navy was certainly bent, with multiple carriers and destroyers severely damaged. Everyone knew the upcoming invasion of mainland Japan would just push them all to the further extremes. In the planned invasion of the southern island of Kyushu in November, minesweepers like the Inaugural would be some of the first ships to take the risks. Sailing in unfamiliar waters, any Japanese shore batteries not destroyed by Army and Naval Air Service bombings would unfortunately make them very easy targets. In contrast, hundreds of Japanese pilots trained to abandon their humanity and lives to destroy the American Navy at any cost. In coastal waters potentially saturated with mines and dominated by unfamiliar shoals, the minesweepers in smaller ships would be easy prey. Even so, most of the American military command and political leadership couldn't see another way to bring Japan to surrender. That was until August the 6th and 9th of 1945, of course, when the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war, with the Japanese emperor reporting over the radio to his people and army the unconditional surrender of Japan. The planned drawing down of the U.S. Navy began even before the war was over, with multiple shipyards being informed by June of 1945 that they would either build their last ships or be scrapping whatever they were currently working on. The orders for 24 Admiral-class minesweepers were canceled during this drawdown. For the most part, after they completed their final missions clearing mines off the coast of Europe and Southeast Asia, ships like Inaugural were moved into the reserve fleets and mothballs. Many of them would also be donated or sold at discounts to allied countries, including the Soviet Union, the Republic of China, the Republic of Korea, the Dominican Republic, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Mexico. As for the Inaugural, she remained in the Galveston mothballs until a former teacher, Robert E. O'Brien, purchased the ship to be moved to St. Louis, Missouri. As a new riverfront attraction, O'Brien promptly filed for his docking and business permission in 1967 and had the ship fairly easily towed up to St. Louis. The Inaugural opened as a floating museum in June of 1968. O'Brien promised the museum would be, quote, a real slick thing. This was especially evident as the riverfront at the time was bustling with all kinds of other attractions, including the SS Admiral, a party steamboat, and a full-scale replica of the Santa Maria. Bought from the Navy in pristine condition, aside from the engines being non-functional, it attracted thousands of tourists from across the state and the Midwest. Well, it couldn't help but look a little out of place on the Missouri River next to the old steamboats and passing pleasure craft. For over a decade, it was a focal point for history buffs as well as naval enthusiasts. Inaugural's life was never dull here, punctuated regularly by class field trips and curious onlookers getting a brief insight into the overlooked aspects of World War II in the Pacific. However, she had to ride out multiple storms, both literally and figuratively. Such was the case when Vietnam War protesters boarded the vessel on May the 12th, 1972, announcing their intention to take the vessel to a North Vietnamese port city. which the US Navy and Air Forces had mined. Now, to some, this might seem like a noble plan, but it was kind of foolish, as the ship's engines were non-functional. At most, they could generate just enough power to keep the lights up and running, but not enough for propulsion, and hence, the protesters were forced to leave the ship the next day, unable to even leave the city. But there were more challenges ahead that this old veteran couldn't shake. You see, maintenance of these old museum ships, even small ones, isn't cheap. And so, increasingly burdened by the ship's operating cost, O'Brien sold it to businessman and entertainer Frank Pearson. Pearson already owned another riverboat, the Goldenrod, which hosted dinner parties and theater for a fair price. Still, he ultimately wouldn't own the minesweeper for very long, since he died in 1988 while under investigation for revenue and wire fraud. Believe it or not, these allegations get worse. For example, his will left his family less than $3,000. Well, creditors claimed he owed them $850,000. But this mess gets worse, as 4 years before his death, he sold the lease to another businessman, Floyd Warman. Warman also opened a helicopter tour company and a floating Burger King/Taco Bell in the same area as the warship. However, his source of revenue, the Warman Oil Company, which he inherited from his father, filed for bankruptcy in 1992 and defaulted on over $1.7 million and multiple large loans. A small political scandal involving that year's mayoral election followed, costing one of his friends the office, but this didn't stop his plan to double down with a floating casino on the same property as his other possessions. Then, just as he was caught in the bureaucratic web necessary to get his casino and necessary revenue, an even greater storm than all of those before was approaching the Midwest, this time in a literal sense. The Inaugural's fate became unknowingly threatened in the fall of 1992 when extreme rain and wet weather resulted in water levels and soil saturation well above the average around the Missouri and upper Mississippi basin. The high rainfall was consistent up until the summer, and I need to emphasize this was a major weather event. The upper Midwest was sometimes drenched in over 4 feet of rain, and even in areas where the storms were smaller, many still saw a foot of rain during June and August. During this massive wet spell, some areas received rain almost 20 days a month. So as you might imagine, severe flooding began in May and lasted in some places all the way until September. As the water level gradually increased along the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, levees failed, causing flood damage. 50 people would tragically drown in these floods, and on the 1st of August, the USS Inaugural's moorings snapped. A state ranger had responded to calls about some explosion or loud noise, which may have been the flooding of the generator or the snapping of the line. Anyhow, he arrived just in time to watch the minesweeper, as well as Burger King and Taco Bell, not to mention that floating helipad, slam right into a bridge. The damage was unimaginable, as the Taco Bell sank quickly, and the collision destroyed the Burger King's top floors. The helicopter pad beached relatively safely on its own, and all efforts were made to try and rescue the Inaugural. And although the Inaugural was badly damaged, it wasn't beyond recovery. So a tugboat was sent in to try and secure the Inaugural on the Mississippi side of the river. Once that was settled, a 6-inch breach in the hull was temporarily controlled with pumps, and a new mooring line was attached so that the ship could be anchored to the MacArthur Bridge. But the damage was never adequately assessed or treated. 1 month later, she rolled onto her port side and sank. Now, given the gossip around Mr. Warman and his reputation, suspicions were high about it being sabotage as part of an insurance scam. However, the investigation concluded it was most likely an accident caused by the flooded river, and I have to agree, that seems like the most likely case. The first man to attempt to salvage the Inaugural was Oki Moore and his highly experienced salvage company. They were met with many challenges, not the least being a sewer pipe that the sweeper had somehow been wedged under when it capsized. During one part of their salvage mission, the sewer gas actually caught fire while drilling a hole in the ship's side to attack stronger ropes. It was around this time that federal investigators also asked Moore about Warman's potential responsibility for the sinking, to which Moore said, quote, "Everyone believed Warman let loose that flotilla and scuttled the minesweeper from the inside." He continued, quote, "I don't buy it. The ship was rotten. When we put a wire around the boat to pick it up, the cables cut right through the hull. And by the time he realized that it would be impossible to raise the ship, he was already owed tens of thousands of dollars from Warman for the work. And critically, you should take note that it was Moore who retrieved what many consider to be the most valuable prize on board, an original 40mm AA gun, a valuable antique that would ultimately become the focal point of defamatory remarks, rumors, and contention. Before we go further here, I need to add a fair and impartial disclaimer. What we're about to discuss has yet to be verified by law enforcement or legal proceedings. We do know that sometime after 1998, Missouri resident Noel Stasiak came into ownership of one of the Inaugural's deck guns and began repairing it enough to be donated to the city. This former Navy reservist laments the fate of the old mine layer, exclaiming during a 2007 interview, quote, "She deserves a proper funeral. To let her just wallow in the mud like a beached whale, it's appalling. It's sacrilege." Allegedly, in the year of 1999, when he was almost ready to donate the gun, just finishing up the final touches, a thief rammed his truck through the front gate of his friend's warehouse where it was kept. From there, the gun disappeared, and the police were so skeptical of their story that a report was never even filed, meaning the incident was an instant cold case. The case went unattended for almost 10 years, until Stasiak read in the morning news on January the 2nd, 2007, that another resident and salvage operator named John Patzius was planning to recover the wreck so that he could help another friend and businessman place it in a dry dock museum, which was a noble idea, as this would not only preserve the historic artifact, but it would guarantee that it could never be swept away in a flood again. However, what caught Stasiak's attention was that Patzius had already acquired one of the Inaugural's 40mm air guns, the same kind of weapon he had been refurbishing about 10 years earlier. Even in the 2007 Riverfront Times article, his testimony was taken from its rumored, which also suggests that that very same AA gun had been stolen and moved at least 3 times since Stasiak first reported it. The article also criticizes the cast of men that are drawn to the Inaugural to recover or scrap it, calling them, quote, "a dubious businessman, a convicted racketeer, a penniless promoter, a boatload of military wannabes, and more than one offbeat scavenger." I want to reiterate here that we have nothing against the men mentioned above. We're merely sharing information about what others posted about them or what they publicly released. None of this is confirmed, and most of it probably can't be confirmed, as we're dealing with multiple first-hand accounts from several very different men, some of whom were recalling details and memories years, if not decades old. And these details probably can't be trusted, because the human mind, brilliant as it may be, is also biased. For example, first-hand accounts and memoirs are imperfect and biased, especially when the people involved have an agenda that they're trying to pursue or legitimize. Putting crazy characters aside for a moment, the odds of recovering the Inaugural in any state are slim to none. If she is ever pulled out of the river after 30 years of damage and corrosion, she will probably only be as good as scrap metal. That's sad, it really is, especially when only one of her other sister ships still survive. That's the unfortunate reality about being a museum ship, as these vessels' longevity is not guaranteed and often not even protected. The USS Inaugural is not the only ship that's been lost, nor is it the only ship that we will lose. And we'll leave it there for today, but I'd like to extend a special thank you to the viewer who submitted this episode idea. If you'd like us to cover your topic, please shoot me an email and include the basics, as well as a few photos for context. Otherwise, until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.